This is all going to be about a perspective that I found really helpful in preventing relapse for anxiety disorders. And that perspective is essentially seeing mental health as physical health. So if you were in really poor physical shape and just totally out of shape, and you didn't exercise, and you were eating really, really unhealthy, and your freezer was just full of pizza pops, which are amazing, and every other meal was going to McDonald's, and you just sat at your computer all day and you didn't do anything, and your body was falling apart, and just getting out of bed made you really, really tired, right? You really, really were experiencing all sorts of negative symptoms from being really out of shape. And then you decided, I'm going to get into great shape. And so you started going to the gym all the time, you got a trainer who was teaching you healthy ways to get into shape, and you were working with a dietitian to come up with a meal plan that worked for you and your budget, and you really stuck to it, and you were sleeping well, and you reorganized your work schedule so that you could live a healthier lifestyle, and you were doing all these things. You joined a peer support group, all of this different stuff to really get yourself into great physical shape. And after a year or a year and a half of that, you were really able to do a lot of the things you weren't able to do before. So it's amazing. You're running 5K runs, 10K runs, the works. You're in great shape. Now, what happens if you stop doing all of those healthy things and you start doing all the unhealthy things you were doing before? Not going to the gym, sitting, doing nothing all day, eating lots of unhealthy foods, not talking about your health, etc., 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 you would progressively slide backwards. And mental health isn't that different. And what I've found works really well for anxiety disorders is treating them in the same way, recognizing there are a set of unhealthy behaviors that we cut out, and then there's a set of healthy behaviors that we bring into our lives. And if we stop those healthy behaviors, inevitably we slide back into those unhealthy behaviors, and we experience the symptoms of the anxiety disorder. When it comes to those behaviors that progressively take us back to that place we don't want to go to anymore, I group them into 3 categories, and they are coping, checking, and controlling behaviors. So what I do, and this is just going on every day, wherever I am, whatever's happening, I'm always just making sure that I'm not engaging in coping, checking, or controlling behaviors, because I know that those are just going to take me back to a place that I have no interest in going back to. Now, you may be wondering, so what are examples of coping, checking, and controlling behaviors? And this is where your brain might start to freak out when you hear this. Because, for instance, I was in the gym the other day, in the gym locker room. Don't worry, this is a PG story. In the gym locker room, and the person with the locker beside me, he had just packed up his stuff. He was going out to the gym, and then I was just getting changed. And then he comes back in, and he goes up to his lock, right, and he checks it. He pulls it a couple times to make sure it's locked. And he's like, okay, it's locked. And then he goes back out to the gym, right? So that's an unhealthy checking behavior, right? He had this thought in his head, what if I left my locker unlocked? Someone could steal my stuff. Oh, my phone's in there and my wallet. Just think about what happened. And so he came back to check. You may be thinking, hey, but isn't that normal? Shouldn't you go and check and make sure your stuff is safe? Right? That doesn't bother me. It's not getting in the way of his life, and that is totally fine. I understand it's not getting in the way of his life, so it doesn't classify as a mental illness. What I'm talking about here are the behaviors that lead you back to mental illness. Right? So yes, it is normal, but I don't think normal is a healthy place to be. Normal is a dirty word in my household. You've probably heard me say before in videos that normal is the place you wait before you get a diagnosis. Trying to do things that you think are normal are probably inevitably going to lead you back to illness or to an illness if you haven't had the pleasure of going there yet. So I'm going to show you something. This is just a really simple diagram of how I think and sort of my perspective on different behaviors that I find really helps me preventing relapse, because I know when I'm moving back towards behaviors that lead to illness. So you see in this diagram here, we've got illness and we've got normal, right? So ill and normal behaviors. They go right here, and that's where a lot of coping and checking and controlling happens. Healthy, you see way over on the side there, and there's a line between the two. That's because things that are normal and things that you associate with your illness, I lump those two together, and I find that really useful to lump them together, because you'll do a lot of things that you think are normal that are just going to lead you back to doing the things that you associate with your illness. So what you want to do, and what I've found really helpful, is getting to that spot on that far side of the diagram, which are the healthy behaviors. Because then I know that if I see myself starting to engage in things that are normal, that people generally say are okay, like of course it's fine to go and check your lock, or when you get the urge to check your phone, just whip it out and look and see if you got an email, or you're worried that you might have said something terrible in an email and you're going to get fired, so you're just going to read through it again and read through it and read through it because you're trying to make sure that it's written well. Right? That's normal. Of course you want it to be written well. And you've probably noticed that a lot of the behaviors, especially coping behaviors, you've noticed that they actually cause you more stress, and they cause more problems, and they only lead to more procrastination, or they actually become addictions unto themselves, in the example of drinking or drugs or food or things like that. Coping behaviors tend to just feed anxiety disorders. You've probably seen the same with controlling behaviors. So I haven't talked much about controlling behaviors, but they're probably the ones you engage in the most throughout your day. An example there might be not explaining something in a work email because you want people to think a certain way about you. But then you have to experience this anxiety around what if people find out about that thing? And then later when they actually do find out about it, and then you have to dig your way out of this hole that you've created from that controlling behavior very early on by just trying to manipulate people's thoughts about you through your words in an email. Controlling behaviors like that are anxieties around something. What if something bad happens? So we try to control people. This can happen at work, this can happen with friends, this happens in relationships all the time. It actually generally leads to that person doing the very thing that we were worried about. Right? Controlling behaviors often lead only to more anxiety, which causes us then to engage in compulsive behaviors that are going to feed an anxiety disorder. And so I recommend trying this out, particularly whether you're at a stage where you want to prevent relapse and prevent going back to the way things were, or you're even just still digging your way out of the anxiety disorder hole. Start to identify the behaviors that you know, okay, these are the behaviors that are associated with the illness. These are the behaviors that maybe don't bother me, but they follow the same pattern. Right? Somebody who's checking that their lock is locked in the gym is no different than the person who's driving home from work to check and make sure that the stove was turned off. Right? There's an uncertainty there, and they respond to it by trying to check or control or cope. So you want to understand what those normal behaviors are that follow the same patterns as your anxiety disorder behaviors. And then you want to know what the healthy behaviors are. So what are the behaviors that are going to lead you away from the place where you are right now? And then identify those and figure out how to incorporate them into your daily life and stick with them. They are the behaviors that are going to keep you moving away from where you don't want to be. They're the behaviors that are going to help you maintain your health. They're the behaviors that are going to put this distance between you and the behaviors that lead you back to your anxiety disorder. And I think for me, that's been the biggest help of bringing a lot of healthy behaviors into my life, is that there's just so much distance. Often I'll hear people say that OCD is chronic and this mental illness is chronic and you're stuck with it. But with so much distance between the unhealthy things I used to do and the healthy things I do now, it becomes quite obvious what I would have to do to go back to the way things were before. Right? Just like physical health is chronic, mental health is chronic too. If you don't take care of your physical health, it gets worse. If you don't take care of your mental health, it gets worse. What this framework of understanding coping, checking, and controlling behaviors are unhealthy for me, what that helps me do is understand what behaviors I need to not engage in. By understanding what behaviors I'm not going to engage in, that also shows me a lot of the healthy behaviors that I am going to engage in to make sure that my mental health isn't sliding backwards, that it's getting better, that it's constantly something I'm able to maintain and improve, and by doing that, not slip back into a relapse. Okay, so that is the tip, I guess, or the explanation of that perspective. It at first might seem kind of weird and strange, but I do recommend you check it out. Look at the behaviors you're engaging in your life. Where are you coping and checking and controlling? And is that really helping you? Or are you seeing that those behaviors are actually causing things that increase anxiety that lead you to engage in the unhealthy compulsive behaviors that you associate with your illness. Okay, so try it out. Remember, normal is a dirty word.